Welcome to the Read This channel. Subscribe. Support those who write today.
Lillian Hart, your role in my heart. The morning light filtered weakly through the cloudy sky, casting a pale gray glow over the city streets. Emily stepped into her studio, the familiar scent of paint and polished wood greeting her like an old friend. Every day she followed the same routine, checking her equipment, arranging her notes, ensuring that every brush, every book, every piece of paper was perfectly in place. Yet today felt different. There was a tension in the air, a quiet anticipation she could not explain, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The door opened, and Alex stepped inside. For a moment he stood frozen, as if gathering courage, and then their eyes met. Emily felt a jolt run through her, a mix of surprise, recognition, and something deeper she could not name. There was a pull, silent and undeniable, threading its way through the air between them. "Good morning," Alex said softly, his voice trembling just slightly. "Good morning," Emily replied, forcing a calm she did not feel. "Please, have a seat." The lesson began. Emily guided Alex through breathing exercises, correcting posture, monitoring every inhale and exhale. Alex mimicked her gestures, but his voice wavered, uncertain yet earnest. Emily's eyes followed every small movement, every subtle shift of his expression. She realized that this was more than a lesson. There was an unspoken connection forming, fragile yet electric, a thread weaving between their hearts.
"Why do you look at me like that?" Alex asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Emily felt her heartbeat accelerate. "It's part of the work," she said, turning her gaze away, even though she knew it was a lie, even to herself. The lesson continued in a charged silence. Every glance, every pause, every minor gesture was heavy with unspoken meaning. Emily felt walls she had built over years, walls that had always kept her heart safe, begin to crumble. And when the lesson ended, she sat quietly, absorbing the lingering tension, the electric charge left in the air. Alex left the studio, but the echo of his presence remained. Emily knew, deep in her chest, that her role in his heart was no longer a distant notion. It had become real, tangible, and irreversible.
Chapter 2. The city woke slowly under a gray, misty morning. The streets glistened with last night's rain, the reflections of streetlights dancing in puddles like fleeting memories. Emily walked deliberately, each step measured, yet her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't control. She kept returning to Alex, not to his voice or posture, not to his technique, but to the way he existed in her presence. His mere being stirred something within her, a trembling she could neither explain nor resist. Every glance, every fleeting smile, every subtle shift in his expression left a trace, a quiet echo that lingered in her chest. Entering the studio, Emily felt the familiar comfort of her space clash with an unfamiliar tension. Every brush, every notebook, every instrument of her trade seemed suddenly charged, as if the walls themselves anticipated what was coming. Alex stepped inside, and time seemed to pause. He moved carefully, almost shyly, yet when their eyes met,
Emily felt her chest tighten. She had never known anticipation could feel so heavy, so urgent. "Good morning," he said softly, a hint of nervousness threading through his calm tone. "Good morning," Emily replied, her voice steadier than she felt, though a subtle tremor betrayed her. "Please, take a seat." The lesson began, but today every movement felt like more than instruction. Emily guided him through the breathing exercises, demonstrating posture, intonation, and subtle gestures. Each movement Alex attempted carried a tension of its own, a delicate negotiation between control and vulnerability. Emily noticed everything: the slight hesitation in his wrist, the way his chest rose unevenly with each breath, the faint uncertainty in his eyes. She felt drawn into him, pulled by invisible threads, and realized with a start that this connection wasn't just professional. Something deeper was forming, quiet and insistent, and it scared her more than she cared to admit. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Alex asked suddenly, his voice a fragile whisper. Emily's heart skipped. She turned away, searching for safety in the neat stack of notebooks on her desk. "It's part of the work," she murmured, even as she knew the words were hollow. The silence that followed was dense and alive. Every glance, every pause, every almost touch carried meaning, threading a bond between them that neither dared acknowledge. Emily's chest tightened, her mind a storm of awareness, desire, and fear. She realized her carefully constructed walls, the ones she had built to keep her heart safe, were beginning to crumble. The lesson ended, but neither moved to break the moment. Emily sat still, letting her mind drift, feeling the lingering warmth of Alex's presence. Even after he left, she could sense him in the air, a subtle vibration in the room that refused to dissipate. Sitting alone, she let her thoughts run free. She knew something fundamental had shifted between them. Her role in his heart was no longer abstract or theoretical. It was alive, beating alongside her own, demanding acknowledgement. And deep down, she knew there was no returning to the life she had before this day, no going back to simple routines, no pretending that this connection did not exist. Her heart whispered a truth she could no longer ignore. Alex had found a place in her life she couldn't give back, and she didn't want to. Chapter 3. The morning arrived gray and heavy, carrying a chill that seeped into Emily's bones. She walked the street slowly, feeling every step press into the wet pavement, listening to the distant hum of the city waking. Streetlights reflected in puddles, fractured into shards of silver and gold, reminding her of all the fragments of herself she had carefully hidden from the world. Her thoughts returned relentlessly to Alex, not to his voice or the exercises they practiced, but to the weight of his presence. It was as though he existed on a frequency her body alone could perceive, sending vibrations she couldn't resist. She had never felt a connection this intense, a mixture of fascination, longing, and a flicker of fear she couldn't name. The studio awaited, pristine as always, yet somehow alive. Notebooks were stacked neatly. Instruments were in their places, but the air itself felt charged, taut
with unspoken possibilities. Emily tried to steady herself. She reminded herself that this was work, that boundaries existed, yet every instinct in her body screamed otherwise. When Alex entered, the world seemed to pause. He moved with measured care, his eyes lifting to meet hers. Emily's chest constricted, every nerve in her body heightened, sensing him as though for the first time. This was no longer just a lesson. It was a quiet collision of worlds, a fragile dance of attention and emotion neither was fully ready to name.
"Good morning," he said softly, his voice steady, but carrying a subtle tension that made Emily's pulse quicken. "Good morning," she replied, fighting to maintain her composure, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Please, sit down." The lesson began. Emily guided him through breathwork, posture, and tone, her hands demonstrating gentle movements, her voice soft but firm. Alex followed, but there was a hesitance in him, a tentative desire to get closer, yet hold back. Every inhale, every subtle gesture, every unspoken question in his eyes tugged at something in her chest. She noticed the small things, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders as he tried to mimic her movements, the faint quiver in his hands, and she realized that the space between them had grown electric, the air thick with an intensity neither had intended. The lesson, meant to be instructional, had become something else, an unspoken communion of hearts. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" he asked suddenly, the question fragile yet charged. Emily felt her pulse jump. She turned toward the desk, tracing the edges of the neatly stacked notebooks as if they could ground her. "It's part of the work," she murmured, though she knew it was a lie. The lie felt small, almost laughable against the gravity of what hung between them. The silence that followed was suffocating and yet beautiful. Every glance, every pause, every tiny gesture became language. Emily felt her carefully constructed walls she had built to protect herself from disappointment, from vulnerability, from love, beginning to crumble. Each heartbeat whispered the same truth. Nothing would ever be the same again. As the lesson ended, neither moved to break the tension immediately. Emily remained seated, her hands resting lightly on her lap, absorbing the lingering energy of Alex's presence. He left, but the room still hummed with what he had carried with him, leaving traces of warmth and tension that refused to dissipate. Alone, Emily let herself reflect. She understood now that something fundamental had shifted. Her role in Alex's heart, whatever it had been before, was no longer theoretical or distant. It had become a living, breathing reality that demanded acknowledgement. And deep inside, she realized she did not want to resist it. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to admit a truth she had kept buried. Alex had claimed a space in her life she could not and would not give back. The city outside moved on, indifferent to her inner storm, but Emily no longer cared. The storm inside her heart had its own rhythm now, and it was entirely devoted to him. She felt almost viscerally that this was only the beginning, that every encounter, every silence, every glance would continue to reshape the contours of her world.
Chapter 4. The morning was shrouded in mist, the kind that blurred the edges of the city and made the familiar streets seem foreign. Emily walked deliberately, each step pressing into the wet pavement, her thoughts consumed by Alex. She could not shake the feeling that today would change something inside her, something profound and irreversible. Her heart was in turmoil, a strange combination of fear and anticipation that made every breath feel heavy. She thought of Alex not as a student, not as a visitor in her life, but as someone who had begun to occupy spaces in her heart she hadn't known were empty. Every glance he gave her, every subtle shift of his expression left her feeling exposed and alive in ways she had long denied herself. The studio awaited, a sanctuary of order and familiarity. Yet today it felt alive, almost sentient. Notebooks and tools were in place, but the air carried a current of tension, electric and suffocating. Emily tried to focus on her task, to remind herself that this was work. But the moment Alex entered, everything changed. He stepped inside quietly, a mixture of confidence and hesitation in his movements. When their eyes met, Emily felt the world shift. Time seemed to slow, and every detail, the light reflecting in his eyes, the subtle shift in his expression, the slight tremor in his hands, became magnified, drawing her in. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice steady, but carrying an undertone of something vulnerable. "Good morning," Emily replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "Please have a seat."
The lesson began, but it was unlike any other. Every movement Emily demonstrated, every breath she instructed, carried weight far beyond technical correction. Each inhale, each posture adjustment, each subtle gesture became a silent dialogue, a conversation without words. Emily noticed everything about him, the tiniest flinch, the quietest sigh, the way his gaze lingered a fraction too long. Her own body responded in kind, every nerve alert, every heartbeat racing. The connection between them was no longer professional, it was intimate, electric, impossible to ignore. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" Alex asked suddenly, his voice low, almost trembling. Emily felt her chest tighten, her pulse quicken. She looked down at her notebook, pretending to be absorbed in it. "It's part of the work," she said, though she knew the words were empty. The silence that followed was dense with unspoken meaning. Every glance, every pause, every almost touch conveyed something they could not say aloud. Emily felt her carefully constructed walls crumble piece by piece. She realized that the rules she had always followed, the boundaries she had clung to, no longer mattered. The lesson ended, but neither moved. Emily remained seated, absorbing the lingering presence of Alex, feeling the warmth he left behind. When he finally left, the room felt hollow, yet charged with the invisible energy he carried with him. Alone, she allowed herself to reflect. The truth was undeniable. Her connection with Alex was no longer a fleeting thought or a professional matter. It had become something living, something powerful, something she could not and did not want to resist. Her heart whispered a truth she had long avoided. Alex had claimed a place inside her that she could not and would not relinquish. The world outside continued, indifferent and moving, but Emily no longer noticed. The storm inside her heart had found its focus, and it was entirely directed at him. Every glance, every lesson, every moment they shared was a thread weaving them together, a delicate and dangerous tapestry she was finally willing to embrace. For the first time in years, she let herself feel fully, without reservation. She knew this was only the beginning, that the bond forming between them would grow stronger, deeper, and impossible to deny.
Chapter 5. The morning was gray and heavy, the kind of gray that felt almost tangible, pressing against the skin and seeping into the bones. Emily walked through the streets slowly, each step deliberate, each breath drawn with care, though her mind raced uncontrollably. Today she knew everything would be different. Something was about to shift, something that neither her careful routines nor her professional armor could prevent. Thoughts of Alex consumed her. She did not think of him merely as a student or someone under her guidance. She thought of him as someone who had begun to occupy the quiet corners of her mind, someone who had breached the careful walls she had constructed around her heart. Every glance he gave, every subtle nuance in his expression, felt like a silent pull, drawing her closer, even as fear whispered for her to retreat. The studio felt charged, almost alive. The scent of polished wood, of ink and paper, the faint hint of rain from the open window, everything seemed more intense, more vivid. Emily arranged the notebooks and instruments with meticulous care, but her hands shook slightly, betraying the storm inside her chest. Alex arrived, stepping quietly into the room, his presence immediately commanding attention, yet softened by vulnerability. Emily felt it, this magnetic pull, the silent current of connection that hummed between them. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment it felt as if the room itself had disappeared, leaving only the two of them, suspended in an invisible space. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice calm, yet threaded with tension. "Good morning," Emily replied, fighting to keep her voice steady, though it trembled just enough to betray her. "Please, have a seat." The lesson began, but it was unlike any before. Every breath, every posture adjustment, every subtle motion carried a weight far beyond instruction. Emily demonstrated exercises, guiding him gently, and with each correction, each encouragement, she felt herself drawn deeper into him. Every inhalation, every exhalation was no longer just technique, it was a silent dialogue, intimate and charged. She noticed the smallest details, the tension in his shoulders, the way he occasionally swallowed hard, the almost imperceptible flicker of emotion in his eyes. And she knew the connection between them was no longer professional. It was intimate, unspoken, electric. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Alex asked suddenly, his voice a soft tremor, laden with curiosity and something more. Emily's chest tightened. Her pulse surged. She looked down at her notebook, tracing its edges with trembling fingers. "It's part of the work," she murmured, though the words rang hollow even to her ears. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Every glance, every pause,
Every almost touch conveyed volumes. Emily felt her walls crumbling, the walls she had built to protect herself, to keep love at bay, to stay safe. Each heartbeat whispered the same truth. Her life would never return to its old patterns. When the lesson concluded, neither moved immediately. Emily remained seated, savoring the lingering warmth of his presence, the subtle vibrations he left behind. When Alex finally stepped toward the door, he paused, and for a moment their eyes locked again, full of unspoken words, questions, and promises that neither dared voice. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "for your patience and for letting me be here." Emily felt tears threaten, though she did not attempt to hide them. Her chest ached, but the ache was sweet, a reminder that her heart had shifted, had been claimed in ways she could neither deny nor resist. Alex left, but the room remained heavy with his presence, charged and unyielding. Alone, Emily let herself reflect. The truth was unavoidable. This connection was no longer abstract, no longer distant. It was alive, real, and entirely hers as much as it was his. And deep within, she realized something she had feared to admit for years. She wanted it. She wanted him. The city outside moved on, indifferent, yet Emily no longer cared. The storm within her heart had found a focus, and it was Alex. Every glance, every lesson, every unspoken moment between them was a thread weaving their lives together. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that what was happening between them was not just chance, it was fate. Her heart whispered its truth with clarity. Alex had found a permanent place in her life, and she would not resist it.
Chapter 6. The morning was cool, almost silent, with a fog that clung to the streets like a whispered secret. Emily walked slowly, letting each step absorb the dampness of the pavement, but her thoughts were restless, consumed by Alex. She knew deep down that today would not be ordinary, that the invisible thread between them would tug harder, testing the limits of restraint she had clung to for so long. Her heart raced as memories of Alex flooded her mind, the tilt of his head, the subtle curve of his lips when he smiled, the intensity in his eyes whenever he sought understanding. It was not merely admiration or attraction. It was a pull that penetrated her very core, a force she could not resist even if she wanted to. Entering the studio, she felt the familiar scent of wood and paper, but today it was different. The room seemed to hum with expectancy, every surface, every object charged with possibility. She set her materials in place, her hands steady yet trembling with anticipation. She knew he would arrive soon, and she dreaded and desired the moment simultaneously. Alex arrived quietly, his presence commanding yet gentle. The air between them thickened instantly. Emily felt the invisible current, the pull of his gaze, and it made her pulse pound in her ears. For a moment it felt as if the world had contracted, leaving only them suspended in a fragile electric bubble. "Good morning," he said softly, his tone calm but undercut with something raw and tentative. "Good morning," Emily replied, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "Please, sit." The lesson began, but today it was charged with something more than technique. Every breath,
Every movement, every gentle correction carried weight beyond instruction. Emily felt her own body responding to his. Every subtle shift, every inhalation, every glance spoke volumes. The studio was no longer a place of learning. It was a space where two hearts began to collide, silently and irreversibly. She noticed every detail, the slight tension in his jaw, the soft exhale that betrayed his concentration, the way his eyes lingered where they should not. It was terrifying and intoxicating. She felt herself teetering on the edge of restraint and surrender. "Emily," Alex's voice was barely audible, trembling with the weight of his own admission. Her chest tightened. "Because we have to," she whispered, even as she knew the words were meaningless. Her eyes held his, searching for an answer he could not yet give. She felt the pull of his presence, a magnetic force that left her trembling with both fear and desire.
Every pause, every unspoken word was a conversation their hearts held without language. Emily felt herself slipping, the walls she had built around her heart dissolving with every heartbeat. She realized that boundaries, rules, fears, they meant nothing in the presence of what was forming between them. The lesson ended, but neither moved. Emily remained seated, absorbing the warmth and tension Alex left behind. His presence lingered in the air, thick and palpable, almost as if the room itself remembered him. Finally, he stepped toward the door, pausing just long enough for their eyes to meet. His look carried questions, desire, and acknowledgement of everything unsaid. "Thank you," he murmured, voice low, trembling, "for letting me be here, and for letting me feel this with you." Emily felt tears rise, but did not hide them. Her chest ached with a bittersweet intensity, pain, longing, and a raw, exhilarating truth. The connection was no longer tentative or theoretical. It was real, undeniable, and fully alive. Alone, she let herself reflect. She understood that her role in Alex's heart had shifted. It was no longer abstract or distant. It was alive, tangible, and irrevocable. And deep down, she knew the truth she had long feared. She wanted him, completely, without reservation. The city carried on around her, indifferent to the tempest in her chest, but she no longer cared. Her heart had found its focus, and that focus was Alex. Every look, every lesson, every pause between them was a thread weaving their lives together. She could feel it forming, a bond fragile yet unbreakable, silent yet deafening in its intensity. For the first time, she allowed herself to surrender to it fully, to feel it without fear, to believe it could be real. Chapter 7. The morning was heavy with fog, a soft gray haze that blurred the edges of the city and made everything seem distant, unreal. Emily walked the familiar streets, her mind a whirlpool of thoughts and emotions. Each step she took felt like moving through molasses, weighed down by anticipation and fear. Today, she knew, would demand something she had long avoided: honesty, vulnerability, and the risk of opening her heart completely. Her thoughts kept returning to Alex, not just to his face, his voice, or his gestures, but to the essence of his presence, the way it lingered inside her, making her pulse quicken, her chest tighten, and her breath catch in unexpected ways. She had tried to push it away, to remain professional, to maintain control, but the pull was irresistible. She felt the invisible threads weaving around her heart, pulling her closer, tying her fate to his. Entering the studio, Emily felt the familiar mix of comfort and tension. Everything was in its place, yet the air itself seemed charged, almost sentient. Every object, every surface, every slant of light through the window seemed to hum with possibility. She arranged her materials, aware that each careful movement was a shield against the chaos of her own heart. Alex stepped inside, quiet but commanding in his presence. Time seemed to slow. Their eyes met, and the world outside ceased to exist. Emily felt the pull of him immediately, a magnetic, almost painful intensity. She tried to steady her heartbeat, but it raced, wild and uncontainable. "Good morning," Alex said softly, his voice steady yet layered with emotion. "Good morning," Emily replied, forcing calm, though her voice trembled ever so slightly. "Please, sit." The lesson began. Today it was not just about posture, breathing, or technique. Every gesture, every instruction, every subtle correction was laden with meaning. Emily felt herself drawn into a silent conversation with him, a dialogue without words that spoke of yearning, restraint, and a deep, unspoken connection. She noticed every detail: the tension in his hands, the small quiver in his chest, the way his eyes lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. Each observation ignited something in her own body, a rush of heat, a shiver of anticipation, and a surge of emotion that she could not deny. "Emily," Alex's voice was soft, almost trembling, carrying vulnerability and desire. "Why do we keep holding back?" Her chest constricted, a mixture of fear and longing. "Because we have to," she whispered, even as she knew the words were hollow. Her gaze met his, searching for understanding, for permission, for a way to navigate the storm building between them. The silence that followed was electric. Every glance, every slight movement, every pause held meaning. Emily felt her carefully constructed defenses crumble, piece by piece. She realized the rules she had always clung to, the boundaries, the self-imposed limitations, meant nothing in the presence of the raw, undeniable connection forming between them. The lesson ended, but neither moved immediately. Emily remained seated, letting the room breathe with the tension Alex left behind. When he finally approached the door, he paused, and their eyes locked once more. The look they shared was heavy with questions, desire, and acknowledgement of all that remained unspoken. "Thank you," he murmured, voice low, fragile, yet strong in its sincerity, "for letting me be here, and for letting me feel this with you." Tears threatened to spill from Emily's eyes, but she did not hide them. Her chest ached with a bittersweet intensity, fear, longing, and the thrill of surrender all at once. The connection was no longer tentative. It was living, breathing, and real. Alone, she reflected on the undeniable truth. Her role in Alex's heart had changed. No longer abstract, distant, or theoretical, it was tangible, alive, and irrevocable. Deep within, she knew the truth she had long denied. She wanted him, fully and without hesitation. The city moved on, indifferent, but Emily no longer cared. Her heart had found its focus, and that focus was Alex. Every glance, every silence, every moment of unspoken understanding wove them closer together. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to surrender entirely, to feel, to hope, and to trust that what was forming between them was real.
Chapter 8. The morning was cold, and a thin mist hung over the streets like a secret waiting to be revealed. Emily walked slowly, each step deliberate, though her mind raced. She could feel the tension coiling inside her chest, the anticipation of what today might bring. Every instinct whispered both warning and desire. This was a day she could not retreat from. Alex was already in the studio when she arrived. He stood by the window, staring out at the damp streets, yet the moment she sensed her presence, his gaze shifted. Their eyes met, and Emily felt the familiar surge, the magnetic pull that had grown stronger with each lesson. She tried to steady her breathing, but her chest was a storm of emotions, fear, longing, excitement, and uncertainty all wrapped into one. "Good morning," Alex said softly, his voice calm but edged with tension. "Good morning," Emily replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Sit, please." Today's lesson began, but the exercises carried a weight neither of them could ignore. Every gesture, every breath, every shift of posture became a dialogue, unspoken yet clear. Emily felt the space between them shrink, a magnetic field drawing them closer, testing the limits of restraint. She noticed every detail about him, the slight tightening of his jaw when he focused, the way his shoulders stiffened when he anticipated correction, the brief hesitation in his eyes that betrayed curiosity and desire. "Emily," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I know," she replied, her voice trembling slightly, though her words carried the truth she had long denied. The silence that followed was thick with meaning. Every glance, every small movement, every pause between them spoke louder than words could. Emily felt her carefully built walls crumbling, brick by brick, as her heart opened to the possibilities she had tried to ignore. She realized that rules, boundaries, and fear no longer mattered. What mattered was the truth of what was growing between them. The lesson ended, yet neither moved. Emily remained seated, letting herself feel the lingering energy of Alex's presence. When he finally reached the door, he paused, letting their eyes meet once more. That look carried questions, desire, acknowledgement, and a quiet promise of more to come. "Thank you," he murmured, voice low and sincere, "for letting me be here, and for letting me feel this with you." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she did not blink them away. Her chest ached with a mixture of fear, longing, and exhilaration. The connection was no longer tentative. It was real, tangible, and impossible to ignore. Alone, she let herself reflect. She understood that her role in Alex's heart had shifted irreversibly. It was no longer distant or theoretical. It was alive, insistent, and irrevocable. Deep within, she admitted the truth she had tried to deny for so long. She wanted him, fully, without reservation. The city moved on, indifferent to the storm within her, but Emily no longer cared. Her heart had found its focus, and that focus was Alex. Every glance, every silence, every unspoken word between them wove a bond stronger than any fear, stronger than any hesitation. For the first time, she allowed herself to surrender entirely, to feel, to hope, and to embrace the undeniable truth of their connection.
Chapter 9. The morning was pale and quiet, almost reverent, as if the city itself held its breath. Emily walked through the streets, her thoughts tangled in a web of anticipation and fear. Every step she took felt charged, as though the ground beneath her knew the tension building inside her. Today would not be ordinary. Today she knew they would confront everything that had remained unspoken between them. Alex had arrived before her, standing by the window, gazing at the damp streets below. When he turned and saw her, his eyes softened, and yet there was an intensity that made her chest tighten. It was impossible to ignore the quiet electricity that had been growing between them for weeks now, demanded acknowledgement. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of something raw and unrestrained. "Good morning," Emily replied, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to mask it. "Sit, please." The lesson began, but it was different now. Every movement, every breath, every gesture carried weight beyond technique. Emily guided him through the exercises, noticing the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his chest rose and fell unevenly, the small hesitations that betrayed the intensity of his feelings. She felt herself responding to him, her body and mind alert, each glance a silent conversation. It was no longer simply about posture or tone. Their connection had grown, deepened until it was nearly unbearable, electric, urgent, and impossible to ignore. "Emily," Alex whispered, his voice low and trembling. "I can't pretend anymore. I can't hold back, not from you." Her chest tightened. The words she had longed to hear and feared to admit pressed against her lips. I feel the same," she whispered, almost unable to breathe. Her eyes met his, steady and vulnerable, acknowledging the storm that had been building between them.
The silence that followed was profound, heavy with emotion. Every look, every subtle movement spoke volumes. Emily felt the walls she had built around her heart crumble entirely. Boundaries, fears, reason, all of it seemed trivial in the face of the truth that burned between them. The lesson ended, but neither moved immediately. They lingered in the space between them, hearts beating in unison, caught in a moment that was fragile and infinite. Emily felt the magnitude of what was happening, the realization that her life, her heart, had shifted irrevocably. When Alex finally approached the door, he paused, letting their eyes meet one last time.
That gaze carried a universe of meaning, longing, trust, desire, and the promise of what was to come. "Thank you," he murmured, voice low and reverent, "for letting me be here, and for letting me feel this with you." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, unashamed and unrestrained. Her chest ached with an intensity that was at once frightening and exhilarating. The bond between them was real, alive, undeniable. Alone, she allowed herself to reflect. She understood with clarity that her role in Alex's heart was no longer abstract or distant. It was tangible, insistent, and irrevocable. She admitted to herself the truth she had long avoided. She wanted him fully, completely, without hesitation and without fear. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent. But Emily no longer noticed. The storm within her had found its focus, and that focus was Alex. Every glance, every silent moment, every shared breath was a thread weaving their lives together. And finally, for the first time in her life, she surrendered entirely to the undeniable reality. Their hearts had found each other, and nothing could pull them apart. Chapter 10. The morning sun pierced through the clouds, soft and golden, illuminating the streets with a fragile warmth. Emily walked slowly toward the studio, her heart both heavy and light, knowing that today would be the day everything changed. Every step was measured, yet every heartbeat screamed with anticipation, the quiet storm inside her, ready to erupt. Alex was already there, standing near the window, hands loosely folded, gaze focused on the street below. But the moment he noticed her, his eyes lifted, locking with hers. Time seemed to suspend itself. Emily felt the familiar electric pull in her chest, the magnetic force that had grown between them over weeks, now undeniable, impossible to ignore. "Good morning," Alex said softly, his voice calm, yet trembling slightly with something more than words could convey. "Good morning," Emily replied, her voice steady yet intimate, betraying her emotions despite herself. "Sit, please." The lesson began, but it was no longer just about posture, breath, or technique. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle instruction carried a weight that transcended the ordinary. Emily guided him through each exercise, feeling the tension and desire in the air as their hearts spoke in silence. She noticed the smallest details, the tension in his hands, the way his shoulders shifted when he concentrated, the almost imperceptible catch in his breath. Each observation deepened the pull she felt, the connection that was no longer professional, no longer tentative. It was intimate, raw, and real. "Emily." Alex's voice broke the quiet, low and trembling. "I can't hide this anymore. I can't pretend, not from you." Her chest tightened. The words she had longed to hear and feared to admit pressed against her lips. "I feel the same," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly, yet filled with truth. Her eyes held his, steady and vulnerable, acknowledging the unspoken bond between them. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with meaning. Every glance, every subtle motion, every pause spoke volumes.
Emily felt the walls she had built around her heart crumble completely. Boundaries, caution, fear, all seemed insignificant in the face of the undeniable connection that surged between them. When the lesson ended, neither moved. They lingered in that suspended moment, hearts beating in synchrony, caught in a reality that was fragile and eternal all at once. Emily felt the depth of the transformation, the knowledge that her life, her heart, had shifted irrevocably.
Finally, Alex stepped closer, closing the space between them. Their eyes met, a universe of unspoken emotions flowing silently, longing, trust, desire, and promise. "Thank you," he murmured, voice soft, reverent, "for letting me be here and for letting me be a part of your heart." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, unashamed, unrestrained. Her chest ached with a bittersweet intensity, a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and surrender. The connection was real, undeniable, alive. She finally allowed herself to feel it fully, without hesitation or resistance. Alone afterward, she reflected on the truth that had become clear. Her role in Alex's heart was no longer distant, abstract, or theoretical. It was tangible, living, and irrevocable. Deep within, she admitted the reality she had long feared to acknowledge. She wanted him completely, with all her heart, without fear, without doubt. The city moved on outside, indifferent to the storm that had settled within her chest. But Emily no longer cared. Her heart had found its focus, and that focus was Alex. Every glance, every shared silence, every unspoken understanding had woven their lives together in a tapestry of connection that neither could deny. For the first time, Emily surrendered fully, not just to the moment, but to the certainty that some bonds are destined, some hearts are meant to find each other. She understood with absolute clarity that their roles in each other's hearts were permanent, unbreakable. And in that quiet, golden morning, she felt it fully. Alex's heart was hers, and hers was his, and nothing in the world could change that.